From Interfaith Alliance, this is State of Belief Radio. I'm Alliance President Reverend Paul Rauschenbusch, broadcasting this week from Chicago.
The United States is no longer a Judeo-Christian nation. That's not a statement of opposition. Judeo-Christian, the paradigm, did good work for nearly 80 years. Now it's time to move to the next chapter.
That's author, speaker, and Interfaith America President Eboo Patel, as heard on his brand new podcast, Interfaith America with Eboo Patel. Eboo is a longtime friend and recent colleague, and he'll be joining me on our show for an honest examination of the potential religion has not only to feed division, as we see happening so often, but also to bridge divides at this moment in our history.
It is blasphemous. It is not of the divine. It is not holy to deny people the right to vote.
When President Barack Obama wanted religious leaders and experts for his White House Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, he called on Fred Davie. When Senator Chuck Schumer wanted a faith leader to join the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, he too turned to Reverend Davie. When Bill de Blasio needed someone to lead the Civilian Complaints Review Board for the NYPD, he also turned to Reverend Fred Davie. Fred is also the senior advisor on racial equity at Interfaith America, and I'm looking forward to spending time with him later in this hour. You can hear State of Belief on the radio and get the podcast on iTunes and all the other podcast platforms. Every week, I am in conversation with the most fascinating and impactful civic and religious leaders across the country, and you will not want to miss it. So please subscribe today. State of Belief Radio is made possible in great part by the generous support of our listeners. If you've made a donation, I really want to thank you. And if you haven't pitched in yet, information on how you can help to keep this show on the air is available at stateofbelief.com. And you can find out more about the work of Interfaith Alliance and join in that work at interfaithalliance.org. And now to my first guest. Right before joining Interfaith Alliance as president, I spent 3 years at Interfaith America, formerly known as Interfaith Youth Corps. This is led by founder and president Eboo Patel. This organization is making an enormous difference in unlocking the potential of America's religious diversity for the benefit of all. Wednesday night, I celebrated with the Interfaith America community as they observed their 20th anniversary in Chicago. And so I couldn't miss the opportunity to connect with my longtime friend and former boss. So here we are in the studio that he uses for his brand new podcast, Interfaith America with Eboo Patel. Eboo, thank you for finding time to talk to me. I am so glad to talk to you, and congratulations on last night.
So, Paul, we are not going to start with my podcast. We are going to start with your fingerprints and your influence on Interfaith Youth Corps and Interfaith America and me. You were literally one of the first people that I reached out to after having the idea for Interfaith Youth Corps in 1998. You'd just written a book on young people and religion, which is exactly what I was focusing on back then. And that book, Teen Spirit, helped me feel like this was a real thing, that the idea that young people inspired by faith across lines of diversity could come together in interfaith action projects. And you generously met me at, I remember the details, at a breakfast spot called Orange with a Peel on North Clark Avenue. And you were encouraging and you thought it was a great idea. And then for years after that, when I would come back to Chicago or to the States, we would meet, we would talk about starting the organization. And then over the course of time, you were at Riverside Church, you were at Princeton, you were at the Huffington Post, you were at Auburn Seminary. We just did things together. Yeah. And you continue to kind of guide and shape and help and support and partner. And then, I mean, like the stars aligned and you came to Interfaith Youth Corps and you played probably the single most important role in transforming it into Interfaith America, including dragging me, kicking and screaming, not quite, but convincing me that the vision had to be bigger and the name had to match the vision. And the studio that we are sitting in right now, you also built. So I just think I think it is really, I think our friendship over 2+ decades. Last night we celebrated the 20th anniversary of Interfaith America, nay Interfaith Youth Corps, but you were there 3 years before the beginning.
Well,
that's really special, Paul. Our friendship is special. You're a special figure in American religion, and I feel proud to know you and to be a part of this podcast. So that is the appropriate beginning.
Well,
for this conversation.
You are very generous with everyone, and I will say that I talked to my staff this morning, and I said what I experienced last night was exactly what should happen at an event celebrating 20 years. We looked back and we heard stories of people throughout the life of the organization celebrating how Interfaith Youth Corps, now Interfaith America, had affected them personally, how the organization had grown, its mission, how the stories of individuals built into the story of an organization, built into the story of a country. I think everybody was like, we can do this. We can build Interfaith America. I just think, so congratulations. Is there anything that stood out from you last night? Because these events they're hard to put on. I don't want to say, let's move on to the next thing, and just take a moment to celebrate what happened last night. And what stood out to you?
Last night was really, really, really special. It was really special. And I think there were many things that stood out. I'm gonna highlight two. The number of people who were there from the beginning and before the beginning and close right after the beginning. The number of people who came was powerful.
Yeah.
The people who were first time on staff at the organization, who literally got paid $18,000 a year, $24,000 a year, and worked to the bone, they came back.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they have gone on to, they had been, many of them built the organization over 5, 8, 10 years. And then they've gone on to lead companies and lead organizations and, be senior people at places at like the State Department, et cetera, et cetera. And one of them said to me last night, Cassie, she was like, I was formed by this place.
Isn't it wonderful?
I
thought one of the best words of the night was, you didn't grow from this place, you grew this place.
Yeah.
You said it more beautifully than that, but it was really like, I wonder if you can, this feeds into a little bit about your book, which I want to also highlight, because your book, which is We Need to Build,
field notes for diverse democracy.
Right. And I think that is speaking into exactly what you're talking about. Like, what does it mean to build? And I want to start there, specifically building with the building blocks of religion, which for many people were like, that's exactly what you need to leave out of the equation. And you were saying, no, actually, that's what we need to be essential to the equation.
So I'm gonna connect that question with the previous one. One other thing I want to highlight about last night was religion was all over the place on stage, and the animating spark of Interfaith Youth Corps back in June of 1998 was that religion can be inspiring. Religion can be inspiring. Your faith can be inspiring. Your grandparents' faith can be inspiring. Other people's faiths can be inspiring. Faith that you believe in and don't believe in can be inspiring. And we should connect to that electric current, and we should use it for good, because it can very obviously be used for bad. But religion is going to inspire people to do things. The question is what. And I don't want to be I don't want to shy away from that. And lots of people over the course of time have subtly asked us to, that we are an interfaith organization. We are about religious diversity being inspiring. And last night, Muslims and Christians and Jews and secular humanists and Sikhs, they embraced the electric current of faith out in the open, and it was so beautiful.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful.
I mean, we could go through the Sikh man who lost his father, Pardeep, in Oak Creek, talking about like how the interfaith community gave not only him back his charge and his life, but also the children of his community. He saw it. I mean, it was just, it's so beautiful. So congratulations. And now going forward, there's work to be done.
Right. Until we need to build. I mean, this is embedded in the book. It's explicit, and it's also woven throughout, which is religion gives us a model for how to do positive social change. And positive social change is the articulation of an ideal and the building of concrete institutions to that ideal. So the articulation of the kingdom of God, that is an ideal, right? The intersection of deen and dunya, that is an ideal. Repairing the world, tikkun olam, that is an ideal. The question is, how do we approximate that in the imperfect place called earth? And you do that through institutions. You do that through the colleges and the hospitals and the social service agencies and the refugee resettlement agencies you build. And it is always going to be imperfect. That's just what it means to be human. That's just what it means to be human. But there's another approach to social change, which is find the things you hate and shout them down. And that's not who we are. That's not what we do. That's not who I am naturally. And honestly, Paul, you have encouraged me in this really positive direction. Your encouragement of be positive. Just be positive, right? There's enough people doing the negative. And there might be some use to that, but that's not who I am. That's not who we want to be at Interfaith America. And we are not making up our approach. We really find it in how religion operates. And I think to myself, like in Islam, what does the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, do when he goes to Medina? He builds institutions. He builds a mosque, which, by the way, serves as a community center for all. He builds a constitution of Medina. He builds a market where people can sell their goods and services at fair prices and other people can buy them. He creates a city by building good institutions. And you know, I have this very simple definition of what the good society is in my book, We Need to Build. The good society is made up of good institutions. So if we have institutions that are not as good as they ought to be, well, the answer is build better ones.
Yeah.
Build better ones.
Yeah, I think you have the idea of like, how do we look at progress? And I think that, you know, like, what does it mean to like focus on how we can go further from here rather than what we haven't done. Like, you know, I think I think it is a mindset. And I think the danger, and this is something that I wrestle with, is like, how do we do that without ignoring the challenges that are in front of us? And I think this is where Interfaith Alliance is a little bit more like explicitly addressing what we see as challenges. And I know we have, you know, I think there's room for both approaches,
Yeah.
but I'm curious, like right now we're just very concerned about what Christian nationalism is looking like. And I wonder how you approach that, which I recognize is going to be different than how we are, but I think that there's overlap and an important recognition that we both want a diverse society where everybody is recognized. People of faith and no faith are all treated with dignity and respect. How do you approach these challenges?
So I do think that there are overlaps, but more importantly, complementarities. And
Yes.
Paul, you know, what you did here at Interfaith America, what you encouraged me to do, which is to highlight white Christian nationalism as a grave danger and as a clear foil to the society we're trying to encourage. And to compare it to its predecessor, which was the KKK of the 1920s. And we've written a number of articles about how the really powerful interfaith movement of the middle of the 20th century, the movement that included Catholics and Jews after a time in which they were profoundly excluded, that created the notion of Judeo-Christian America, a step forward from Protestant America, that did its work because it pointed to the KKK and said, that is not the America we want. But there were 4 million people who were part of the KKK in the 1920s. It was a major organization.
They were marching down the center of Washington, D.C.
Electing candidates.
Proudly.
Yeah, electing candidates. Yeah. And so I absolutely agree there are grave dangers there. And I've actually really taken your guidance and encouragement and lived into the positive without being Pollyannish about the negative. Part of it is it's who I am, right? It's who I am, I think, by nature. I also, and this is really important to say, you know, I'm from India, and I've spent months there over the course of my life, and I have seen many a leprous beggar child. And I know what bad looks like. I don't know what bad lives like. I've never lived anywhere close to that, but I know what really bad looks like. And I just have this bone deep sense that I think is probably reasonably common amongst immigrants. And, if you can breathe the air and drink the water, alhamdulillah, praise be to God. And that it's not an argument for complacency. It's an argument for optimism. It's an argument for building from potential, right? And I one of the things I actually loved about last night was there was joyous critique from the stage. I don't mind critique. I just can't stand despair.
Yes, I think that's so important.
I can't stand just a sense of like we have to find the gray in the silver lining. I don't want to do that.
The way I understand your mission is that there's never a time when there's not an option to do something better.
I love that. Yeah.
There's never a time when we can't figure out, okay, yes, and here's what we're going to do about it. And I think that what you do is bring together, you're bringing together what I believe can be hopefully a willing coalition who will hopefully make the center hold. I am focused, and we as an organization are focused of the kind of existential threat that we see to some rights, but we're also I believe in this bringing people together to learn from one another and to have everyone transformed, and that's what I thought was so beautiful about last night.
So last night, Ramina Shishibi, my friend and somebody I just have love and admiration for a ton. His band played, and also, of course, he's the founder of an organization called the Inner City Muslim Action Network, which is amongst the most impressive Muslim-oriented community development organizations in the country. In any case, one of the things that Iman does, which I just think is a model, is they agitate around corner stores in black neighborhoods that sell liquor. They encourage the corner stores to stop doing that and instead to carry fresh produce. But you know what they also do? They started their own grocery store.
Yeah.
So they're not just going around telling other people what they're doing wrong, right?
They're building it.
They're building what right looks like. And that's actually what religion is all about, right? You have a vision of what the good society is, and then you build something concrete that approximates that. And by the way, there's, the definition of a food desert is a certain geography without access to fresh produce. So guess what? If you build a grocery store, it stops being a food desert, right? In other words, you have really solved a problem for a particular geography, and you have offered a model to other people for how to do it. It is actually a deep concern of mine if we are training hearts and minds to go around telling other people what they're doing wrong all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that figuring out ways to move forward to achieve our country, as Baldwin said, and that Rorty wrote a book about, I think that's how can we move forward? One, really kind of, I won't say despairing because then you're going to come for me, but difficult situation happened recently in Dearborn where, I don't know if you saw this, but there was a largely Muslim community pitted against the gay community about schools. And it's like a test case of divide. And then the state leadership came in and almost fanned those flames. And, and I'm just wondering, in a case like that, first of all, we recognize that Muslim and LGBT are not necessarily different things. There are LGBT people in the Muslim community. We know that. But what is a way forward there that along the model of We Need to Build, along the model of Interfaith America, where communities could come together and hear one another and find a common a path forward?
So what I'd love to do is move 3, 4, 5 steps before that moment, right? There is a mindset right now where it's basically the dominant versus the marginalized. And the dominant are white, Christian, middle class, educated, straight men, and everybody else is the marginalized. And all the marginalized agree with each other. And so in that paradigm, it's shocking to see people of a quote unquote minority religious persuasion be in conflict with people of a minority with gay folks. But it's not shocking to me at all because I don't buy into the dominant and marginalized mindset. I buy into the mindset that we live in a diverse democracy, and diversity is not just the differences you like, and that what we have to learn how to do is to be able to disagree on some fundamental things, work together on other fundamental things, and be able to have common spaces where it is easier for people to cooperate. So if we begin from that principle and that mindset, I think the question becomes, how do we have schools where people of a range of identities feel like they can bring their best student and teacher self to that school? I don't know the solution to this particular moment. I do think what that community did at that school board meeting was very hurtful to people, and I'm sad about that. I think more of those kinds of things are going to happen, in part because the manner in which loud voices on the left and loud voices on the right have formatted the situation assumes that groups of people who, in fact, do have interesting tensions all should be getting along, let's say. I don't think that that's the case. I think that there are obviously differences across religions and across communities, and the question is, how can those differences live in positive relationship and cooperation with one another? And there's probably no more fundamental place to do that except at a school. Maybe a hospital is a second fundamental place, right? But how do our schools and hospitals be spaces where people who might have deep disagreements can cooperate with each other and learn how to build positive relationships? Learn how to build positive relationships.
This reminds me of just a core principle at Interfaith America is, how do we train up a next generation to be able to listen to one another in really active ways? And I remember when we were, when I was with Interfaith America and we were out there with vaccine work, and part of what we were training people to do is, like, you can't just dismiss concerns. You have to listen. You have to understand. And then hopefully through ongoing relationship, you can find ways forward, because we do believe that getting vaccines is important, but we also believe that, hitting people over the head with it is no longer effective. And so how do we talk? And I think that holds true for a lot of other things. So I just want to recognize that this is one of the great work of Interfaith America, is that teaching a next generation how to listen and engage one another in a way that will lead to positive outcomes.
Yeah. And a big part of that work, I think, is to create a space where it is easier for people to cooperate. And if you find, there's a hint of Dorothy Day there, right? The great Dorothy Day line was, she was trying to create a space where it was easier for people to be good. How do you create a space where it is easier for people to cooperate? And cooperation doesn't mean agreement. It means working together on something we all consider important. Having a functioning high-quality school is something everybody considers important. My guess is that there are ways to arrange a space where people, again, with deep disagreements, find it easier to cooperate, and in that cooperation, they learn how to like each other.
Yeah.
And minds get changed, and more importantly, hearts get changed. So while I understand the kind of, line in the sand approach about things, I don't actually think that I would prefer an open hand rather than a raised fist.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what the genius of Interfaith America and what you're offering. I want to talk a little bit about the podcast, because
something else you encouraged me to do. Thank you for that.
And I think anybody listening right now is recognizing the gift of language and the spirit of I won't say optimism, but hope and pragmatism, in the deep sense of pragmatism that Ibu brings. You're also offering that in conversation with a lot of people from all sides of the spectrum about the future of Interfaith America, the nation, not just the organization. Talk a little bit about what you've experienced so far through these conversations.
Well, I will begin with the story of how you convinced me to do a podcast, which is you said to me, you're like, look, there's all kinds of people out there talking. You actually have something to say. And more importantly, over the course of 20 plus years, you've met a lot of other people who have interesting things to say about the positive role of religion in the world. And when you use the role of religion in the world, it clicks something in my Muslim brain that there's a classic Muslim kind of juxtaposition is known as deen and dunya, faith and world. And Islam is a religion that leans heavily into how faith meets world. And here's what I mean by that, right? The Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, receives his revelation in the cave on Mount Hira in the year 610. Well, after he receives his revelation, he never goes back up on that mountain for extended periods of time. He lives his life in the world. And while Jesus is a great prophet in Islam who brings a powerful message, it's Peter and Paul who do the conversions and build a church. But in the case of the Prophet Muhammad, he does all of that. And the reason I say that is because my faith is a faith that engages in the world. That is its particular kind of emphasis and gift. And so this notion of deen and dunya, how does a religion meet world, was the central ethos of the podcast. And I got to talk to a lot of great people about that, particularly how the shifting demographics around American religion, the growth in atheists and agnostics, the growth in Muslims, the relative declines in white Christianity, what that all is going to mean for American religion. I spoke with Simranjeet Singh about his great new book, The Light We Give. I spoke with Krista Tippett actually right when she was ending her weekly radio show and going to all podcast. I spoke with John Powell and Trabian Shorters about the intersection of race and religious diversity. And Trabian said something really beautiful to me. He said his grandparents would say, the real world, ... And by the real world, they meant the spirit world. The spirit world was the real world, right? And they would just use the phrase commonly and not explain it. And it took Trabian a while as a kid to figure out that like what Grandpa is describing is actually the spirit world, and that's the world that he lives in. I spoke with David Brooks about shifts in American religion demographics and where religion meets world. Robbie Jones, Shirley Hoekstra from the Evangelical Christian Campus Coalition, the CCCU, Lori Patton, the president of Middlebury, Josh Stanton and Ben Spratt, who wrote a great book called Awakenings about powerful movements they're seeing within the Jewish community. So it is a podcast that I'm very proud of. Silma, who was one of the producers, said, "We're popular in Ireland." Evidently, some dozens, soon hundreds of people are passing this podcast around in Ireland.
I love it. It's no longer "we're big in Japan."
That's right.
We're popular in Ireland.
That's right.
Listen, it's a wonderful. I listened to your conversation with Simran, who's a dear friend of both of ours, and it's just it's so inspiring because with you and with Fred Davie, who we also talked with, everybody's coming from somewhere, and everybody's building their life as they're trying to build their community, their family, and their nation. And so it's just a really, that's a lovely place. I encourage everyone to look for Interfaith America with Ibu Patel. We will put links on our website. I just want to thank you so much. Dr. Ibu Patel is founder and president of Interfaith America and host of the brand new Interfaith America with Ibu Patel podcast. His latest book is titled We Need to Build Field Notes for Diverse Democracy. Ibu, thank you for the warm welcome. Congratulations on an extraordinary celebration, and thank you for being with us here on State of Belief Radio.
Thank you, Paul, and love you, really, for all the years. Thank you.
Up next, Reverend Fred Davie, Interfaith America Senior Advisor on Racial Equity. If you miss any part of today's program, you can hear the full episode anytime on our website. You'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, extended interviews and transcripts, and an archive of past shows, all at stateofbelief.com. You're listening to State of Belief Radio, religion and radio done differently. From the Obama White House to Union Theological Seminary to the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, the Reverend Frederick Davie is a high-profile and respected voice on diversity, inclusion, and freedom. Fred is also senior advisor on racial equity at Interfaith America, which is where I was able to catch up with him. Fred, welcome to State of Belief Radio.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Paul.
It is so amazing to be with you. You've done so much. Like, that was just like a snippet of what you've done. So it's just like, but you also come from somewhere. And I was just wondering if you can talk a little bit, not to out your age, but go way back.
I've lived a long time.
And tell us a little bit about where you come from,
Sure.
which informs like what you've been doing with your life.
Sure. As I reflect on my socialization, being raised, I think there are two things that really formed me as a kid. That is faith and service, or spiritual development service. And I see it now. I didn't necessarily see it at the time. So it's a little town in North Carolina called Belmont. When I grew up there were about 5,000 people in the town. I don't know, maybe 600-700 of us were black, and the rest of the town was white. The town kind of fully integrated when I was 10 years old. A number of small black churches in our little village, and then a couple outside of what would have been considered the black community, or there were a couple of black communities in Belmont, but the main one was the one where I grew up. And our church the church is, I grew up Presbyterian, which is kind of unusual for African Americans in the South, and there are reasons for that I can or cannot get into, we'll see. But our church and the churches around us were very much involved in the community because they were the institutions that primarily addressed issues that this black community was having in the predominantly white town. And I came of age, when Martin Luther King Jr. and, the SCLC and Jesse Jackson and Y.T. Walker and Ralph Abernathy and all those people were kind of in the mix of things. I was young. I was 12 when King was assassinated, but I was still had enough consciousness, and I was aware enough as to what was going on around me, and that these people of faith were involved in positive community change. My church was involved with trying to make positive community changes, were the other churches in our community. And so spiritual growth and development and a life of faith for me, was directly and closely associated with addressing community needs, with community change, addressing the things that people needed just to make a go of it from day to day. And there was little to no disconnect for me with that. And that was about service. So faith development really was about service for me. And
it's service, and it's also how you engage with issues in your community, affecting your community, right?
That's right.
I mean, it was just a part of what it meant to be a faithful person in your upbringing.
That's exactly right. It was fully integrated.
Yeah.
And I only came to know that perhaps other people had points of view on that when I went away to college. And my college required religion courses and, all kinds of discussions about, whether or not you could actually equate faith with works, as it were, and that whole debate that went on. But it formed me. Yeah. And it very much carries through to this day. Yeah,
you've shared with me a story that I just think is worth bringing up, that there were some pretty flamboyant types in the church and around the church in your hometown.
Yeah.
Small time North Carolina.
Yeah.
And what it kind of, thinking back on what it meant to have these flamboyant, presumably gay men, fully integrated into the life of the faith community.
Right.
I wonder if you could just say a word about that.
Yeah, and fully integrated into the life of community generally in our little village in Belmont. So these were actually relatives, my mother's friends, It was mostly men. I came to learn later that there were several women as well. Many of them were, several of them were what we would call cross-dressing men. But, they were people's children. They were part of the larger family and community of that little black village. So, Wilbur, or Tuck as we called him, he played the piano in churches. James was a caterer, among other jobs that he did, and would help out at church with meals. When we graduated from high school and had a prom, he sponsored a big before the prom party that all of our little community came out to. And in the 60s, 70s, George, or Georgie boy as we called him, George was living with, had a live-in male partner, and there were comments about it, but it was accepted because, Tuck was Helen's son, and James was Mr. Theo's son.
In some ways, it was accepted because they were people.
They were people.
They were full people who were part of the community.
Absolutely.
They were sisters, brothers, uncles, children. I think it's as we're in this moment where people like these people in your community are being held up and demonized as a way to show what's other and what's not part of our community. It's just important to remember that this is, LGBTQ people have always been part of the community.
Totally.
And, it makes me wonder how that has impacted you and your work with, this contested term now called religious freedom, and how you get into that conversation with the background that you come from.
Sure. So there are a few pieces to it. I think that what we're seeing going on now is religious people on the right, the far right, using the LGBTQ community as a foil, as a way of organizing. It was abortion before that. It was race before that. And so now they need a new organizing cry, and without any compunction, without any sort of heeding to the call of the gospel and the scriptures, they have decided that that LGBTQ people are a target, and that this community can be used for organizing. And it's across faith traditions now too, right? There's a big article in the paper somewhere in the Midwest now, a group of people who embrace Islam have gone after a local school board over books and went
I was in Dearborn.
Dearborn.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, and it's heartbreaking as well, because it really is. It fails to recognize that within every one of those communities, including within Islam, there are LGBTQ people, and it's not like religion versus
children,
and they're people's children,
they
and
are not objects.
No, they are not objects,
they're
and
not pawns to be used for organizing.
Absolutely. So tell me about how does this fit in with religious freedom? Because
Right.
I as I mentioned in the intro, you're very involved in this question on the international front, and maybe you can start there. It doesn't have to be just about LGBTQ. How do you understand religious freedom as a person who's trying to navigate this in part for the U.S. government now?
Yeah, totally. Well, let me just say it started. It started in earnest for me, really, with the advent of charitable choice in 1996 in the welfare reform legislation, which I actually supported, and then it became very real when I was on the White House Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships in the Obama administration. And we were asking this question: what should the regulations look like around this, particularly when it comes to religious freedom and the delivery of social services and other things? So here's my take on this, is that for religious institutions that want to be involved in partnership with the government to do any number of things, if they're going to accept government money to do it, then there should not be any right to discriminate against people in the delivery of those services or in hiring people to do the work that is funded by public dollars.
1,000%. But public dollars means your money,
right.
my money.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yeah, and so I realize that that's probably at odds with this Supreme Court, but I think that's where we should start. And if there's any reason for deviating from that, it should be extraordinarily compelling.
Right.
Because we get into some really murky and difficult territory when we decide that you can accept public money and then decide who you're going to serve and who you're not going to serve and who you're going to hire just based on your religious beliefs, using public money to do it, and who you're not.
Totally.
And
I mean, it's the way you're describing it is so common sense, and yet it is something that's being debated. I just want to say thank you for being so clear on it. How do you feel like that is playing out in America? But then how do you see religious freedom? There's different issues when you go abroad, because you're going around the world talking about religious freedom. So I don't want to I want to make sure that we get a chance to get into that.
It's different in different contexts,
yes.
right? So let me just say at a high level, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has a responsibility by law to advise the U.S. government, mainly the White House, the State Department, and the Congress, on how U.S. foreign policy can be formed and shaped in order to support freedom of religion or belief or no belief in countries around the world. And the way it plays out again at a high level is that religious minorities pretty much become the constituents of USERV, because religious minorities in countries around the world are generally those that are discriminated against. Now, some of those communities are evangelical Christian communities or Christian communities more broadly, that are simply trying to be in countries where they are in the minority. Some of it are Muslim sects in countries where they are the minority. Some of that has to do with different expressions of Islam, so Sunnis and Shiites, etc.
Right.
Struggling to.
I mean, what's interesting is that just hearing you say that, really, light bulb went off, although it's a dull light bulb because it's pretty obvious. But what is the religious minority in one country is the religious majority in another country.
Exactly.
And so it's not about we're lifting up evangelicals everywhere. It's when evangelicals or Christians or Catholics are a minority in a country, but then it can be Hindus in another country. It could be Muslims in another country, right?
Absolutely.
So it's not about a specific religion.
That's exactly right.
It's about envisioning a world where everybody can be themselves in the context in which they live.
That's exactly right. So the Rohingya in Buddhist Myanmar or Burma they live in a very tragic and horrific situation perpetrated by Buddhist extremists, which we don't often hear.
We do not hear about that. And it's really, thank you for raising that up, because there's an idea that all Buddhists are just ringing bells and on the mat. Right. And this is just, the reality is that religion can be weaponized anywhere.
Absolutely.
And every religion can be weaponized anywhere.
Right. And so the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom seeks to address where that is happening and get the U.S. government to use its leverage in those countries to ensure that people aren't oppressed or repressed, jailed, killed because of their religion.
Yeah, and again, it's public money. How are we spending public money in these countries around the country, around the world, excuse me, to make it positive for people to have freedom of expression, freedom of belief, in a society that should, that hopefully, ideally, is cohesive and finding a way to move forward together.
And societies that have signed on to covenants, international covenants and agreements that prescribe freedom of religion and belief.
Yeah. Let me do a little thought experiment for you. You're on this commission and you come to a country called, let me call it the the United States of Rurerica, which is a stand-in for our country. If you were coming in as an observer with the same mandate that you bring to every other country, what would you see here that is positive, and what would you see here as far as religious freedom that we should be working on?
Yeah, well, the one thing we should really celebrate, and Ibu Patel, founder and president of Interfaith America, formerly Interfaith Youth Corps, says over and over again, we are the first religiously diverse nation experiment in the history of the world. And that is true. And we should really hold that up and celebrate it, but we should also protect it. And right now, it seems to me that there is an attempt to equate, at least in the Christian community, nationalism with Christianity. So we have this Christian nationalism, mainly sort of far-right, white evangelical Christian nationalism that's seeking to impose, I believe, its point of view on the rest of America. That is not good for Christianity. It is not good for a pluralistic nation. So the challenge for us, and particularly those of us at places like Interfaith America, is to remind the nation of this really wonderful experiment we have here. It's not perfect, but it is working, and it is working pretty well. And so working on making a more perfect union, not working to impose a particular point of view, theological point of view
Absolutely.
on everybody else.
You preaching right now. I wonder if we can switch to talk a little bit about your work at Interfaith America, and specifically lifting up the location of Black history in America as a location for interfaith work, and as something that should not be on the fringes, but actually should be at the center of what we're thinking about what is to be celebrated about the history of our country. And that has many arms that you're working on right now. I wonder if you could talk a little bit just about the Black Interfaith Project at Interfaith America, as well as, well, I want to turn to midterms and go back to the conversation of white Christian nationalism, which I think those things go together.
Sure. So on the at Interfaith America, again, formerly IFYC, I serve as the Senior Advisor for Racial Equity. Under that rubric are several programs, one of which is called the Black Interfaith Project, the Black Interfaith Program. And sort of simply put, it is a program designed to appreciate the history of Black faith diversity in America and the way in which that Black faith diversity has played out within the Black community itself. So in other words, the experience of Black interfaith in American communities as unique unto itself. Our default tends to be that people of African descent in America are Christian, and most are. But there is a rich web tapestry of other faith traditions within the Black community that we have not highlighted, celebrated, or accessed in terms of the interaction of these faith communities with one another as a source of strength, power, agency, and direction for how we live out our lives in America today. So this project wants to, in the first order, appreciate that history, right? Acknowledge it, talk about it, share it through stories and papers and events, and then look at how that history of Black interfaith engagement within the African American community, or the Black community in America, intersects and integrates with the larger faith community and the larger interfaith community in the country. And all of that leads again to this really wonderful experiment of a religiously diverse democracy that we're all trying to support and maintain.
Yeah, I think it's extraordinary. And the people who have come together for this project, congratulations. It is I think one of the most exciting things in the interfaith movement, if we can call it, it's an edge that shouldn't be, it shouldn't be on an edge. It should be really, it's at the core, and it's wonderful the way you are bringing it together. I've been to events. You've had events at the White House.
Yes.
You've had events at the National Museum for African American Culture and History.
Right.
You're just doing amazing things, bringing people together. And so there
are a lot of people to thank for that. I want to acknowledge my colleague Alexis Vaughn,
the Reverend Alexis Vaughn, extraordinary.
The Luce Foundation and Jonathan Van Antwerpen for supporting it.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people and a lot of institutions, organizations involved in this, but it is and Ibu Patel and Interfaith America for recognizing the need to do this. So it's important work. It's exciting work.
Talk about as an extension of this, but really central to all of our lives right now is where voting fits into this. And you have a project called The Vote is Sacred. And I think right now, as we see efforts at corroding democracy and suppressing votes, and I don't know if you saw this footage in Florida of felons, humans who had committed crimes and served their time and were trying to vote, as is should be celebrated that they're participating in democracy. It was a ploy. It was a stunt.
Just harassment.
It was a stunt.
Suppression.
It was unbelievable.
It is unconscionable.
And
it shouldn't be tolerated.
It should not be tolerated. I mean, it's
democracy.
And so when we talk about vote is sacred, that was like blasphemous. That felt like just an abomination. Anyway, tell us about Vote is Sacred, and tell us personally, how you're feeling about these midterms, and what's at stake. What should we be thinking about?
So, the Vote is Sacred project begins with the premise that the image of God, the image of the divine, exists in every person, and fundamental to that is the ability to choose, agency, and voting is right at the heart of that agency. And it's a sacred act. And to deny people the right to exercise that agency is blasphemous, is to deny the sacred within them and the right to exercise what's sacred within them. So this project looks at promoting voting, working with colleges and universities, working with other national institutions, obviously working with interfaith institutions around the country. To promote that. It's particularly important, I think, going into the midterms in 2024, that we really pay attention to all the efforts, Florida being the most egregious of them, at voter suppression around the country. It is blasphemous. It is not of the divine. It is not holy to deny people the right to vote. I would call on Americans who, are concerned about rightfully economy, the crime, those issues, and would tend to want to back people who deny election victories, people who want to exclude people from the democratic process, people who believe in all kinds of conspiracy theories about all types of folks, people who engage in both subtle and blatant anti-Semitism, that before we find ourselves backing those people, which it looks like a majority of Americans might because of fears about economy and the economy and what's portrayed as crime through the media, we should think whether or not we want to enter into a pact with people who believe those things, who not only believe them but actually exercise them. And particularly as people of faith, we should ask ourselves, is that holy? Is that holy? And what happens which will happen when these people don't live up to what they're claiming they're going to provide? If we've allowed autocrats and authoritarians, people who would deny elections, people who would engage in all types of racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, to then control the levers of power, how are we going to be able to wrest that from them when they will disappoint us and not live up to what they're going to do? So I would just call on my fellow Americans to think hard about that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that is a perfect place for us to stop. But before I let you go, what is one thing that gives you hope right now?
Young people. Many other young people I see, young people around Interfaith America, young people at Union Seminary where I spend some time, who are students who are coming through, young people that I'm mentoring now. And I'm mentoring a young guy, gay, identified young man who, his father was killed in a road rage in Boston. His uncle introduced us, and we have just hit it off. He's about just turned 22 years old. He, is putting himself through college. He works full time, goes to college full time, has a relationship, has a passion for justice, and is a riot and is a fun kid. Yeah. He gives me hope. Yeah, he gives me hope.
I love you lifting him up, and all the. I agree. Young people have a really strong vision, and they are committed to creating America that they thought they were promised. And yes. and even though disappointment after disappointment after disappointment, they're like, we're going to work for it. We're going to make it happen, and they have no time for this kind of nonsense. Right. And by the way, if the faith traditions are going to back Christian nationalism, if they're going to back anti-LGBTQ, if they're going to back anti-Semitism, if they're going to back authoritarianism, the young people are going to leave. Right. And the big problem with that, and we're both pastors, so I'm going to preach for a second, is it means that they're getting a perverted understanding of what Jesus is. Yes. And so there's no way there's no way that they could ever encounter actually this incredible, radical, prophetic, amazing person who is Jesus. Anyway, right. This is an interfaith show, so we don't need to go there. But it is young people are not going to have time for religion of any kind that backs that kind of thing.
Well, certainly not organized religion that is engaged in this kind of hypocrisy. Right. Absolutely. And they shouldn't be involved in it.
Right. I'm with them. Yeah, let's go. Let's go. Reverend Fred Davie is Senior Advisor on Racial Equity at Interfaith America and serves on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Fred, thank you so much for being with us today on State of Belief Radio. I really appreciate you and all you're doing.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thanks for all you do as well. All you've done here at Interfaith America, all you do at the Interfaith Alliance, and all you've done with your entire life. It's good to call you a friend and a colleague.
Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have on this week's show. I hope these conversations have been as inspiring for you as they were for me. Our guests today are facing the enormous challenges facing our democracy head on, and using that as a starting point for bridge building and creating community around shared values and foundational principles. These are the stories we need to keep hearing, because it's the scary stories that always seem to get the most attention. And this is a great example of what State of Belief is all about, and a great reason to help us amplify voices like these who are doing the crucial work. I hope you will consider helping us grow with a financial contribution. Information on how to donate is available at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. We are going to keep bringing you these stories, and you can be a part of making sure these encouraging stories are heard by sharing State of Belief on your social media and emailing it to your friends and family. Let's get more people listening and more people taking part in these conversations, both on and off the air. Never miss an episode by subscribing to the free weekly State of Belief podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. And join the conversation. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at State of Belief, and share State of Belief with the people in your life. State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week for more stories celebrating the creative contributions our diverse belief systems can offer for the future, as we join together and build a nation with liberty and justice for all. Until then, I'm Paul Rauschenbusch, and that's State of Belief.
I think it's time we stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.